Can you hear me now?
Yes, I do. Hello.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah,
so I don't know what happened there.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for being with us. We're starting the session somehow on time with just 5 minutes of delay. Hello to everybody on board. I assume that more people will join us in the minutes to come. Let me give a very brief introduction of Mr. John CARR. Mr. John CARR is a leading expert on internet and online safety and security, in particular focusing on the safety of the next generation, our children. He has held several offices of advisory nature and expert nature. He can just maybe elaborate on them too, with the United Nations Agency for Telecommunications, known as the UIT, if I'm not mistaken, Union Internationale des Télécommunications. In English would be like International Telecommunication Union, I suppose, ITU, right? Yeah.
Correct.
And he's also a very active member of the civil society, member of two leading NGOs. One of them, at least as far as I understood, do focus on child safety. I didn't have the time to focus on the second one. And last but not least, he holds the Order of the British Empire. So, Mr. CARR, I would just in advance, please accept my apology if my English is going to be very broken. It's so not my mother tongue, and unfortunately I've never had the chance to live in any English-speaking society. The floor is all yours. We start perhaps with your now going on debate on the online safety bill in the United Kingdom, and then maybe we would have a touch upon your more hands-on opinions about Apple, as I know that on FT I read your letter sent in reaction to another leading expert on what Apple is doing, and your particular focus on Instagram and child safety, especially considering child pornography. At your service, sir.
Good. Well, your English is excellent, and it's a lot better than my Persian, that's for sure.
Oh.
So I'm just going to bring up some notes that I've made.
Please.
Where have they gone? Yeah, so anyway, I know this by heart, so I really don't need my notes, I suppose. Oh, here they are. Yeah, so United Kingdom, currently before the British Parliament, we have a draft. So in other words, it's not the final version. It's a draft bill which the government has published called the Online Safety Bill. It's been a very long time coming. The last three governments have promised something like this. Finally, it's here, which is very good. It's very ambitious. It's very big. And even though, by the way, I've never voted for the governing party in the United Kingdom ever in my life, I have to say that this is an extremely good bill. And people across all of the political parties, all of the major political parties, are broadly in agreement that the main elements of this bill are extremely good. It's not perfect, and I'll come on to that in a minute. So what's happening right now, and this is a little unusual, not completely unusual. It's happened many times before, but right now the bill is being considered by a joint committee of both houses of Parliament. So the House of Commons and the House of Lords. Experts, politicians, but experts from both of those houses are now going through the bill line by line to see if they can recommend any improvements to the bill. They're hearing expert testimony from all kinds of groups and civil society bodies and academics and so on. And at the end of hearing the evidence, and going through the bill line by line, they will tell the government how they think the bill could be improved. The government will then consider what the Joint Scrutiny Committee, that's what it's called, the Joint Scrutiny Committee of both houses has said, and then it will publish its final proposals. And that probably won't happen now until January, because that's how long these processes take. So in January, the final version of the bill will come to Parliament. And of course, as it goes through Parliament, it's very likely that it will be amended and changed, and there'll be debates, and the government will have to decide whether to give way or whether to stand firm. So it'll be a big kind of political occasion when the bill starts its passage in Parliament. But whatever happens in those debates, the core elements of the bill are extremely good. And I'll explain what some of those points are now. First of all, what this bill says is what many governments in the West have now realized, which is that self-regulation has failed. Leaving internet companies to decide for themselves how they are going to run their businesses has failed. We've seen all kinds of harmful content, all kinds of illegal content. We've seen misinformation, lies. We've seen terrorist content. We've seen all kinds of things being published and propagated through the internet by these big companies, and they've failed. For whatever reason, they have failed to deal with it adequately and properly. One of the great examples of this, of course, took place in Washington, D.C. on the 6th of January this year. The whole world saw a group of people trying to stop the next president of the United States from being sworn in, because the former president, Trump, and his crazy lunatic supporters were trying to invade Congress to stop the legal processes from happening, because they believed that the election had been stolen by Biden from Trump, whereas and this had only been possible because the big internet platforms have been spreading all of these lies and allowing all of these lunatics, and there's no other word for it, to organize this attempt. It was a coup. It was an attempted coup in a way. It would never have succeeded, but that doesn't mean it should have happened in the first place. It was a terrible day. And I think that was a final trigger for many governments around the world to say, we've got to change the way the internet is being run. But I'm not going to get into those broader political questions, because that's not really my area of expertise or focus. The British bill deals with many issues, but the ones that I'm most concerned about are in relation to children and the protection of children. 1 in 3 of every internet user in the world is a child. In the United Kingdom, it's 1 in 5. So whatever you might think the internet is, it is absolutely definitely a medium for children, a medium for families. And the internet companies have to recognize and accept that and make the internet a healthier, better place for children to be. So the bill focuses on companies which allow user-generated content to be posted by private citizens, or allows user interaction between internet users. So it's aimed at companies like Facebook and Google, YouTube, Instagram, all of these big platforms that allow anybody to post whatever they like. In future, these companies under British law are going to have very specific responsibilities. For one thing, they will be legally obliged to do a risk assessment of whether or not these services, as they are trying to provide them, could harm children. Now, to go back to your earlier point about Instagram, what we now know about Instagram is that the way its algorithms were working was producing some terrible consequences for children. So, for example, there was a child, a 14-year-old girl in England called Molly Russell, who got very depressed and very upset and got interested in self-harm. this happens when children get depressed. So she went on Instagram and she typed in queries about self-harm. And the way the algorithms then worked, it kept sending her more and more information about self-harm. So whereas initially she might just have gone in and then come out again, the whole way that the platform was working was dragging her back and giving her more and more information about how she could hurt herself. She got interested in suicide. So when she went into Instagram and started making queries about suicide, she was getting more and more information about suicide. So instead of being helped, here was a child with depression, here was a child who was ill, she was not very well. What the platform was actually doing was making her condition worse. So under the new bill, a platform like Instagram, any platform that's going to be used by children, will now be under a legal obligation to consider how the operation of their platform could harm a child. And if they reach the conclusion, as obviously Instagram will do or would have done, that the way their algorithms, the way the site is working could harm children, they will be under a legal obligation to change the way the system works to stop that from happening. You might have hoped that these internet companies would have voluntarily done this themselves, but they didn't. That's why we're having to change the law to compel them to do it. Another obligation that every internet company that operates in the United Kingdom will have once this bill becomes a law is they will be under a legal obligation to see whether or not any illegal content like child pornography, your child sex abuse material, as we call it, is being distributed over their platform. And they will be under a legal obligation to take steps to detect it and stop it from happening and delete it and report it to the police and all of those kinds of things. I think at the moment, if any British company or any company operating in Britain finds that kind of material on their site, I'm sure they are reporting it to the police. But what is not happening is that some companies are not actively taking steps to stop it being uploaded to their sites and services in the first place. That will change when the new law comes into effect. The law will also require all sites and services where children are likely to be users to present information to the children in ways that children can understand. So we don't want any more 1,000-page long contracts or 1,000-page long terms and conditions that nobody ever reads. And even if you read them, you can't understand them. And that's for adults. So children have got no chance. In future, these internet platforms will be required to inform children in a way in which children are likely to understand what actually is happening on that platform or on that internet service. So we can expect to see cartoons and simple language, diagrams, rather than thousands and thousands of legal words, lawyers' words, which is what you see at the moment. The bigger platforms will also have a legal obligation to safeguard journalistic content and democratic values. So there's no intention to suppress free speech, or there's no intention to suppress or prevent anybody from taking part in healthy political debate. But there will be an obligation for these sites and services to protect it. And I'll explain why. The way in which some of the platforms are working at the moment, for example, is particularly for women politicians, and we have a lot of those in Great Britain. Some very horrible people, mainly men, are going on there and threatening them and saying horrible things about them. And so a lot of women have decided that they don't want to take part in political life anymore. If this is the horrible way they're going to be treated, because the internet companies are not doing enough to stop it from happening, then they'd rather...
Motion detected.
Oops, sorry.
That's okay.
Hello?
Oh, yeah, I have you. Yeah, I do.
Sorry, my microphone fell over. Then a lot of women, as I've said, have decided that they will not take part in political life if that's the kind of treatment that they have to get, which their children are aware of and their husbands and other family members are aware of. So that's another important change in the way the law will be after this bill has become an act, which is, when it's been through Parliament, it becomes an act and then it becomes the law of the land. There's going to be a new regulator. Well, it's not a new regulator, but the existing telecoms regulator. It's called Ofcom. It stands for the Office of Communications. That is going to be the body that has the legal obligation to enforce these laws, these new laws that the Online Safety Bill will introduce. It will have considerable powers. It can fine a company up to £18 million or 10% of its global turnover if it's found that the company is not complying with British law. There's quite a lot of stuff in the bill as well about codes of practice. So when the bill becomes an act, when it becomes law, Ofcom will consult widely with the industry, with civil society organizations, with police, about the way in which the law should be implemented in practice. So it's probably going to be 18 months or 2 years after the law has been passed before it will actually, or some of these laws will actually become operational. I mean, that's just, there's nothing we can do to speed things up. That's just the way in which these processes work. And one of the issues that's going to be quite controversial, and it's not clear yet which way the government will jump on it, is whether or not to make the directors of internet companies criminally liable if their companies fail to honour the new laws. At the moment in the bill, what is proposed is that the government will take a reserve power to introduce criminal sanctions against company directors or senior members of staff of companies. In other words, what the government is clearly saying is, look, we might not implement this law, we might not actually introduce criminal sanctions against you, because remember, if it's criminal, you could go to jail. But that's up to you. If you implement the law faithfully, speedily, and accurately, we probably won't introduce criminal sanctions against you. But they're really therefore just sending out a warning to the internet. But you know what? Some people think that's a silly attitude to take. Some people think we should go in straight away from the very beginning and say, look, you've had enough warnings about your bad behavior in the past. If you don't observe the law, you will be committing a crime from day one of the new law coming into effect. That's going to be quite a controversial bit of the bill, and we'll just have to see how that works out when the bill gets to Parliament. There are other arguments going on around the bill about whether or not it should include online fraud or commercial things of that kind. The bill was never meant to cover those things. The government always said this was about online safety, focused principally on children, but not only on children. And they didn't really want to get into the issue of fraud or advertising or things of that kind. But there could be a lot of pressure when the bill gets to Parliament to try to change the bill in that way, to include those, or to include more stuff, put it that way, about those particular topics. As I said, it's a very, very big bill. It's a very long bill. We're very pleased with it in the main. But I'm happy if you've got any particular points or queries, you have to try to answer them.
Yes, that would be very kind. Thank you so much. Yeah, I have to be again sorry in advance because unfortunately I'm coming from a background which is by training and profession and education related to legal studies and being a lawyer, and I don't have cartoons to present my stuff, but I only have lawyers' words to use. Anyway,
that's all right. I was a lawyer once.
Oh yeah. Oh great. Thank you. I hope that someday I would use the same sentence and say I once was a lawyer. Anyhow, Yes. So what comes first to my mind, and with your permission, we go a little bit into the details of the bill as it stands right now. As you say, you say 150 page, something like that kind of a bill, with like, I mean, subordinate documents like the like 4 or 5 other documents, assessment and everything. But the bill itself, what would basically concern me as a lawyer first and foremost would be applicability and enforceability. You mentioned, and I detected in your words, the service providers that operate in the UK. But let's take a look, if we may, at the bill. And okay, do you have now my screen, everybody?
I do.
You can see, right?
I do.
So this part, which is already highlighted, a user-to-user service or a search service, which are the 2 different types that the bill defines. Like, I mean, the first one would be like Facebook, Instagram, and all this that you just basically refer to and described in a very quite accessible way. And the second one is search services that are search engines, or I mean, at least part of it with search engine.
Yeah.
I mean, the way that the bill introduces. So it says has links with the United Kingdom. I suppose the drafters wanted to just separate themselves from the word operate, because operate means something, operate in the United Kingdom, but has links. Then they go into A and B, which is a significant number of United Kingdom users, are using that service, or United Kingdom users from one of the target markets for the service. This means that because they are aware that by the very nature of online life, it's not always the case that the service provider operates in the United Kingdom.
Correct.
So it's not, by the general, tenets of law, when a company is not within the territory of Her Majesty, then is not bound by the laws of the land. So then this question of applicability comes into place when for example, Mr. Zuckerberg would never, let's say, come to the United Kingdom or any territory on which the laws of United Kingdom are applicable. Then even if we talk about the criminalization of the the criminalization of the anything attributable to the director, or put that aside, even the financial kind of penalties like the liabilities that you mentioned, it can be so hard. How would you like to, or what if you have come with a sort of solution that how can laws of a land be applicable across the planet? If such a thing. So this would be the question of applicability and enforceability. If you can reflect on that.
Sure. This is a problem that we've faced many, many times, for example, with the pornography industry. There are no significant pornography companies in the United Kingdom. There are some, but the vast majority of pornography that appears on the internet comes from the United States, from California in particular, and from a few other places. There's some coming out of Holland and places like that, but there's very little in the United Kingdom. But British children can see it. So this has been a very, very big issue, certainly for me personally, for the past 10 years or so. So the way that you deal with that is, and we came up with a solution for this some years ago, and it's reflected in this bill, is that Ofcom will have the power ultimately to block access by that company to the United Kingdom. So there would be geo-blocking. So in the end, the company would have a choice to make. Either it will say, well, we're not interested in making any money anymore out of anybody living in the United Kingdom, or we will comply with the law, because the courts or Ofcom would be able to order internet access providers not to allow access to those sites or services anymore. So people in the United Kingdom wouldn't be able to access them. Now, is that likely to happen with Facebook? We'll see. That would be a very big deal if that were to happen. It is at least legally possible, because there are provisions in the bill for what they call business disruption measures. I think but you know what? Here's the thing. We've got all kinds of laws in the United Kingdom and in Europe generally. For example, the data privacy laws.
Yeah.
All of the companies observe those laws precisely because they are laws.
Mm-hmm.
The problem we've had up to now is there have been no laws, so that the company could just decide for themselves what they were going to do. When these new laws come into effect, you're right. In the end, they could just say, well, we're just going to walk away because we don't have any legal incorporation in England or the United Kingdom. We have no major assets there. We're just going to ignore the law, and they can't come to our countries and arrest us because they have no legal jurisdiction. They have no
Australia had the same experience
with Facebook, right? And the news thing, exactly. But at the end of the day, these businesses, the United Kingdom is the second largest source of income from advertising on the planet. The United States is number one. It's got the biggest advertising market in the world, the United States. Britain is number two, right? Okay. So companies want to be operating in the United Kingdom because they can make a lot of money here. Yeah. But if we say to them, okay, you can make money here, that's fine. But you've got to obey our laws. And if you don't obey our laws, we will block access to our country.
I see. So, okay, a small jump cut, if you may. Yeah, because it's a very light-hearted conversation. What about children of a very cute Afghanistani family who do not have any of social that sort of financial power within their economy, that if they block, if they could technically, but they're children too, right?
Yeah,
we're talking about 80% of the world. Not all children. I mean, I never had the luxury of living in London as a child. I had the semi-luxury of living in Shiraz and then living in Switzerland. But what
you are 100% correct, and it's worse than that. It's worse than that because I know a lot of these people in these companies because I've been involved in this area of work for a long time. I have had governments from small countries, right, ring me up or email me to say, John, we can't get anybody in Google's head office or Facebook's head office or Microsoft's head office even to reply to our emails. Is there anybody? Can you get anybody to have a word with us? So you're. But the problem is, if you've got a country with only 2 million people in it, 3 million people in it, and there's lots of small countries like that around the world, or you've got a country that's not very rich, these big companies don't care about you, so they will ignore you. I mean, that's a problem. 100%, you are absolutely right. We can't solve that problem from Britain.
Yeah, and that's the point. Do you think that it's a little bit like the pandemic? Let's think about it. When I reflect on the issue, that right now the humanity is facing certain challenges, which are by very nature, by very definition, they are not national anymore. But our only tools that we have are national bodies with national measures. We do not have any else. So do you think at the end of the day, these kind of efforts that you are putting a lot of energy into, like in the United Kingdom, something similar to that is happening, I know, in Iran. Maybe you were also aware of that, but very much lags behind in certain aspects as I compare the two texts between the bill and the Iranian bill. And also the country that I'm sort of more familiar with, Switzerland, also a small country, but they have been capable of regulating certain stuff. I mean, Amazon is huge, but it is out of that market. Done. And they are just practicing it hardcore. Violence cannot be viewed on any platform in Switzerland. Even on Twitter, once a kind of rough boxing video comes up, which Twitter allows, suddenly it disappears and says it's not available. On YouTube, the same thing. It's a very hardcore enforceable, but thanks to the financial power that they have and all the banking system and everything, that's other people, CNN Money, which is the money a channel of the whole CNN is incorporated in Switzerland and operates from there. This is quite telling. So yeah, so and they can do stuff. But let's not even talk about Afghanistan. Let's talk about a country which is not, kind of a world power, even one may say, something like Turkey. They are not capable of doing that. It's not a very small country, or even Iran for that sake. It's kind of a, tough guy when it comes to many issues. But when it comes to these concerns, which is about children, which is about the most vulnerable segments of the society, is there anything coming to your mind? Because you have this touch of a global governance through your Geneva-based organization, and you have seen a representative of different countries. Do you think there can be any solution globally that we can address the issue altogether, or at the same time avoiding the self-regulation thing, which never worked?
Never worked.
Yeah.
Well, as you mentioned at the beginning, I've worked with the ITU in Geneva for over many, many years. I'm afraid this is about we're talking about geopolitics now. We're talking about the way the world actually works, as opposed to the way the world we might like it to work. There is no world government. There is very little prospect, in my opinion, for getting any kind of international law about how the internet should be governed. And the reason is that we have great big differences of opinion about these things. Take the issue of pornography as an example. I remember when I was talking, I've been to Tehran, and the definition of pornography, for example, in Iran is very different from the definition of pornography in the United Kingdom or most of the European countries. The definition of violence, or what constitutes violence in Japan, is very different from what constitutes violence in England. So when you've got these big political differences and these big cultural differences between countries, it's very hard to see how you could ever get agreement globally on a single code that could work. I know the ITU would like to do that and has tried to do that. We now have this body called the Internet Governance Forum, which the UN sponsors. I've been to every single one of its meetings, bar the first in 2005 in Athens. That was the only one I missed. And I don't see any prospect in the near future of a global system emerging. So I think it does come down to individual countries trying to do the best they can for their own people. And hopefully, if we can show that it works and it works well, other countries will copy it. Because if enough countries do the same thing, adopt the same sorts of laws, in effect, we would get a world system. But we won't get it through the United Nations, I'm afraid, not in the near future.
Perfect, great. So let's go back now to the bill and certain questions I had about this issue. There are schedules attached to the bill, as you do very well know. I want to just have your reflection also on the issue of pornography, considering certain provisions in schedule number 1. Let me share the screen again so we can read from the text itself. Okay, so internet business services. These are basically exempt from the bill, exempt services. Internet business services. And it says that a user to use a service or search service is exempt if the conditions in subparagraph 2 are satisfied. So A, the service is an internal resource or tool for a business. Second one would be if P, which is the basically person carrying blah, blah, is the basically provider of the service, and C, only to a closed group of people. So perhaps this is what they mean, certain kind of, network or platforms for the needs of companies and stuff. But now for the, because this was one of the things that I was, during the pandemic, I found the time to focus at would be this, as I understand, especially the Canada-based pornography companies. Now they are coming. Yeah, like the Pornhub is, which is the biggest of all. They are having new business models, which is basically about closed groups having people verified through their own ways of verification, not a governmental one. So they are qualified to perform on our platform, and then qualified people to view and pay and somehow control the activity on the other side of the planet or anything, whoever is. I mean, it's because it's not about Canada or it's not about anywhere, people can be from anywhere, and it would be a closed group. And this would be one of the, maybe if I may have a sort of reflection on the law, maybe it would be useful. I suppose this way that you put the schedule is somehow also opening the space for those people, and it would be out of the reach of the bill, because it is for, I mean, it's a business that is operating this sort of, platform. It will be by the P, which is the person in charge of the company who is providing it, and it is for a closed group, and it's for business sake, obviously. And I assume, it's an example. I want to say that because the online business activity and in general the cyberspace is so diverse, and every day comes with something, I mean catches us by surprise, that any law that we try to enact suddenly becomes impotent to capture and clutch the situation. So is there any particular umbrella term or solution you have in mind so that we could somehow, at least for a period of time, avoid these sort of escape ways of these sort of companies, especially the pornography industry?
Two comments on that. First of all, this bill is not going to outlaw pornography in the United Kingdom. There's never been any intention to do that. But what we will see as a result of this bill is that any pornography company that wants to continue to publish pornography in the United Kingdom will have to take very strong steps to make sure that children can't see anything that they're publishing. So the children's groups have never said that pornography should be illegal. All we've ever said is children shouldn't be able to access it. And our law, that's what our law says. The law says children shouldn't be able to access pornography. And here's another illustration of how impotent those laws have been, because the internet is full of pornography that children can see. But when this new law comes into effect, that will cease to be the case. Now, as for your wider point, yeah, you're right. I mean, a closed group is outside the scope of the bill. So if you can set up a group where there are particular qualifications that are needed before you become a member of it, you can do whatever you like, pretty much. It's not just to go back to the point I tried to make at the beginning. This bill addresses public spaces on the internet that allow user-generated content or search services. It does not attempt to regulate every single aspect of what happens on the internet. That's why closed groups will be exempt.
I see. Okay, thank you very much. Now, if you may, we move a little bit towards a bigger issue, and that is about the governance generally. I understand that, you mentioned that self-regulation is not going to work, but what I assume is that somehow the materialization of what a Milton, the son of famous Dr. Milton of liberalism, basically mentioned in the late 70s, early 80s, the concepts of anarcho-capitalism. Anyway, I mean, in a situation, which is, because anarchy, by definition, or the way we understand, it's a very leftish, extra leftish kind of, animal. But at the same time, capitalism is very right, on the right side. But anarcho-capitalism, in his idea, is like that states will be governed somehow by the authority or the sovereignty of the capitalists.
Yep.
And I don't mean to be nasty at all, but when I read your letter about Apple,
Apple,
because you raised Apple is going to go deep into my devices and everything. And before I want to make any move, they are going to detect what it is. And you believe it's a good idea. And I suppose it's a very sublime idea that you have, because it makes sure that's bad stuff that we don't want out. They would not even leave our devices. Okay, fine.
Correct.
But at the same time, isn't this giving a lot of power leverage to a single company in California? So if I may just read one sentence, if my subscription of FT still works, it does. Yes, this is you, right? Yes, it's right. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, this in particular caught my attention. If people believe Apple or indeed malevolent governments could misuse the technology, this is an important but different point. Yeah, this different point, which speaks to how we regulate or supervise the internet. Okay, this different point, could you reflect on that? How much do we have to let these people to govern us?
No, it's true. The point I was trying to make in that letter, and that particular bit that you mentioned, is this: if you think about a gun, a gun can be a very good thing. It can stop a lion from eating you. It can stop a madman from murdering your wife or your children. But a gun can also do very bad things. It's the same with technology. The technology itself doesn't do anything bad.
Right.
It's the question is, how is it used and how is it applied? Now, in the case of Apple, what Apple is saying is, we have a list of child pornographic images, child sex abuse material, and that has been certified as being illegal by NCMEC in the United States, which means that the police have agreed to it, the courts have agreed to it. This material is without question illegal child pornography. Right? So what Apple is saying is, we don't want anybody using our telephones or our networks to exchange this kind of illegal material. So what we're going to do is, we're going to develop a system that will allow us to see if you are going to distribute one of these images, and if you are, we will delete it. We will stop you from doing that. So the question is, do we trust Apple to do that? Do we need, and this is the point I was making, it's not about the technology that Apple have developed. It's a question of whether we trust Apple, or whether we have governance systems or supervisory systems in place that can reassure you and reassure me that that's the only thing that Apple are doing, that they're not spying on me or a bad government. I mean, it's not just Apple that could do that. A government could do it. A hostile government, a bad government could do it. So it's about, how do we ensure that that those bad things are not happening? I mean, how do we know they're not already happening? Not on Apple, I mean, but in general. How do we know? How do we know what any of these companies are doing? There's no transparency. There's no supervision. There's no regulation. That's what we have to change.
Okay, thank you. I see. So with that, I would like to open the platform to our other participant. If anybody has a point, a question, something to share, we would be more than happy, because we have people over there, some people with English names, some with a Persian names. So anyone who has a point, wants to contribute to this fruitful talk, please hold your hand up and I give you access. Yes, Mr. Bakilian, please go on, sir.
Hello, John.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Is that Syed?
Yes.
Oh, hello. I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name. It's good to speak to you again.
Do other European countries follow this model?
No.
Do they want to have such a law?
No. Now that we're outside of the European Union, we are making up our own laws for ourselves. The European Union is at the same time looking again at some of its laws, but it's not copying the way that we're doing it. It doesn't have the same legal obligations, for example, to look for illegal content that we're going to have in Britain. So I think the British laws will be better than the European laws. Although, by the way, I should say that the European laws are only just going through now as well. So it's possible that they could change their mind at some point. But at the moment, no, the European laws will be different from the British laws.
Okay. And what about Canada?
Yeah, Canada, well, they've just had an election. So the new political alignments within the parliament, the new Canadian parliament, are not yet clear. They were doing a lot of work around pornography, good work around pornography, and a good work around child protection. So we're all now waiting to see if that good work will carry on with the new parliament.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sayed. Thank you very much. So do we have somebody else who wants to join us? I suppose Dr. Jalili would have quite good addition because he is on the board of those folks in Iran who are trying to enact something. Dr. Jalili, can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you. Hello, John. Do you expect that international community, some bodies like international laws or international bodies such as the Security Council or for example, ITU and other bodies prepare some law for all other countries?
They have drafted codes of practice. They have drafted advice. The reason I came to Tehran a few years ago, and I had a wonderful time when I got to Tehran, by the way, wonderful hosts, was that you published, the Iranian government published the ITU's document, which I helped to write. But it is only advice. It is only a code of practice. It's not an international law. And if you want my honest opinion, as I was saying earlier, I don't think there is any prospect in the near future of there being any kind of international legal agreement about how the internet should be governed. There are things going on, you know, China and Russia and the Americans and the European Union keep talking about cyber warfare and how to regulate that, but I'm not very optimistic, at least not in the near future, about that producing anything that will affect the kind of issues that I'm interested in, at any rate, unfortunately.
Okay, so generally you advise any national government to basically take care of their societies and the way they can access to basically information. This is I'm
afraid so. I'm afraid so. Yeah. The Council of Europe, which is not as European Union, and is still a member of the Council of Europe. I'm an advisor to the Council of Europe. They have developed an extremely good set of resources, a very detailed set of resources, which the 47 governments that are in membership of the Council have endorsed and agreed. That could lead to an international treaty or a convention, but it will take many years for that to happen. And of course, it would only apply in any event to members of the Council of Europe. Azerbaijan is a member, so that's one of your neighbors, but they're not, you know, that's the furthest we go to the east, if you see what I mean. So it would be very good. The Council of Europe is a great organization for doing stuff like that, and they have got some excellent treaties and documents, but I think it's still going to be quite a way in the future before we see anything greater than that.
Yeah, I see. Okay, thank you so much. You know, the only maybe point from this side of the globe that I may add to that is that sometimes national regulation of the internet, when it's a voice coming from people not belonging to the Western side of the world, then it's being heard totally differently. It's being heard totally differently, even though the concerns are 90%. I don't say 100%. 100% does not exist. Then it's being heard in totally a different issue, and to maybe.
No, I understand that. Listen, you mentioned that I'm an officer of the British Empire. It's an empire that doesn't exist anymore. but I'm a white man from Britain, the old imperial power. When I go to Africa and parts of Asia, I absolutely understand when I speak, people hear me in a different way. I absolutely get that. And it's true. The dominant powers in the world of the internet are all in Europe and America and places like that. Different set of concerns, different set of issues. It would be wonderful if the United Nations could be the vehicle for developing a global set of laws that we could all honor, but it's not going to happen.
And in a word like this, because you just brought again your my glorious OBE. Let's put it this way: in an imaginary world, if you, the person that you are, with your race and ethnicity and everything that you are, if you happen to be, instead of in an imaginary world, let's say, instead of an OBE, you were an ORG, which is the imaginary Order of the Revolutionary Guard, what would you have done to the internet, which was under the domain of your authority? Honestly,
the first thing I would do is enforce transparency on the companies and the way they operate, because if there was transparency, if we could be confident as citizens of the world, citizens of our individual countries, that the companies were behaving properly and legally, and in the best interests of society, if you like, I would be a lot more relaxed about regulation. But the problem is we've never had transparency. Everything that we know about the internet, it's either because the companies themselves tell us, or when something has gone wrong and they've been taken to court, we find out, or there's a whistleblower. That's very unsatisfactory. So it means I think transparency is the really, really, really important thing.
So it means that Iran right now needs to do something reasonable so that Facebook, Google, Twitter, they would be available operationally within the territory, and at the same time they are transparent to the authority. This is what you say.
Correct.
But they do not accept to come because we want them to be transparent. Then the other one would be, I think the solution would be what you mentioned earlier, somehow filtering them, stopping them from having access to these. Is that the
well, I mean, that's what some countries have already done. I don't think Google doesn't operate in China, or Facebook doesn't operate in China. There are several countries that have not allowed certain services to operate. And whatever you think of those governments and their politics, that's the kind of thing that we will see more of if we don't have proper transparency.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. I suppose it's already 55 minutes. In one,
I've got to go to the railway station and collect my wife.
Okay. So we don't want to just hold you here. If you have any point about Leeds United,
I really enjoyed the conversation. Really good to speak to Saeed again.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. It's great. And maybe the final word would be, I would like to let you know that some people on the board are also fervent supporters of Leeds United, as I know you are. Oh yes, exactly. So if you didn't have to go to pick your wife from the station, you would have maybe some reflections on Leeds United too. But thank you very much. It was a great time. Thank you indeed.
Thank you.
I'm looking forward to more of this. Bye-bye.
Good night. Okay, bye.
Good night. Bye.